Hey everyone, welcome to Digital City and this talk on why your business doesn't feel very agile and how to use a value-based product strategy to adapt and empower. So my name's Luke Gallimore. I'm the head of product management at Monstarlab. We are a global consultancy in technology. For this talk then, whether you're designing a digital product from scratch, building on legacy, or going through a transformation, an agile strategy today is essential. It enables healthy debates, adaptable decision-making, and ultimately better business outcomes. And in this talk, I'm going to explain why values beat goals in strategy. And I'll introduce 4 components of the values-based strategy that we use at Monstarlab. And explain why, if you have good values, you'll have good goals and hopefully a good product at the end of things. And I want to start in what might seem like an odd place, the chessboard. So if you imagine a game of chess, you've got 16 pieces, 64 squares, and 2 opponents. It's a very simple and controlled environment. However, after 3 moves each by black and white, there are over 9 million possible next moves. And this complexity means that you have to think as you play. Adaptability is the #1 competitive advantage in the game. And both chess players and agile teams have to make lots and lots of small, short-term decisions over time to achieve their long-term strategies. So what makes a good chess player? Well, good chess players start with overarching rules that they interpret to decide on the best individual moves that lead to winning games. When things get difficult, they're able to adapt. Bad chess players play individual moves, if you like, with no regard for overarching rules, and inevitably they fall prey to their more adaptable opponents. And there are lots of rules that you can use in chess, but we can use a really basic example. So how do you open a game well? Here there are 3 rules that you can follow. Firstly, protecting your king. Secondly, control the center of the board. And third, try and move more pieces into the game as much as you can. If you follow these rules, you're successfully working towards the long-term strategy of attacking your opponent king. And the power of these rules is they allow you to adapt to your opponent's moves. It doesn't matter what they do, you can always act and you'll always be able to work towards checkmate if you follow those rules. Consider instead a fixed and static plan to open a game of chess. So let's say first I want to move my king's pawn to the e4 square, then I want to move my king's knight to the f3 square, then I want to move my king's bishop to the d3 square. And trust me, there's nothing intrinsically wrong with these moves in isolation. In fact, they follow the rules of a good opening. However, by thinking about the game in terms of fixed and finite goals and having that fixed and upfront plan, you don't leave yourself ready to adapt to your opponent's next moves. So if my opponent did this, I'd be in trouble really, really early. And like I mentioned before, there are 9 million possible moves at this point in a game. So a kind of step-by-step pre-planned goal-based guide just won't work. And developing digital products is a lot more complicated with many, many more variables. So following rules is far more powerful than just striving for planned short-term goals and milestones. Rules allow you to adapt. But the question is, how does this, it's all very well and good. I'm sure many of you have watched the Queen's Gambit recently. How does this actually apply to Agile? Well, Agile is the practice of iterative software development. And when it's done really well, it will lead to faster delivery of higher quality software that ultimately delivers more value for the user and for the business. And Agile typically sits in contrast to Waterfall, where predefined goals provide a step-by-step guide for actions. Decisions are made up front with little to no empowerment in the team during the ongoing process. And to be fair to Waterfall, it definitely reduces uncertainty of what's to come, which is great for stakeholders. That's why it's been popular for so long. Stakeholders just want to know what's coming and when so they can get on with their job, which seems like fair enough. However, anyone who's been in digital for any amount of time will tell you that things are unpredictable and Waterfall is far from adaptable. So agile digital development is all about rolling with the punches and being able to successfully adapt to the challenges and new information as it comes along. Put simply, more adaptable agile teams are more successful. Again, that's all very well and good in theory, but the title, as the title of this talk alludes to, I see many agile teams that do not feel very agile or adaptable at all. And to use the chess analogy, it's usually because they're playing individual moves instead of using overarching rules to guide their short-term decision making. The goal-based, inflexible waterfall mindset inevitably creeps in to agile and restricts that adaptability. And no amount of stand-ups or backlog grooming is going to solve that. So what is the solution? From our experience in Monstarlab, the best solution is a values-based product strategy. First, let me outline what I mean by values-based. Maybe start with a question to that. How do you know if you're a good person? Most people think about the answer to that question in terms of their values. Am I honest? Am I generous? Am I creative? The values are themes which describe the kind of thing that you tend to do over time or how you behave. Values are also used as North Stars, and they help guide your actions to be better. And there's an important difference between a value and a goal and how the two relate. A value is an ongoing and lifelong process. It can never be completed or ticked off a list. Instead, it provides a direction on how you act and behave. So, for example, be brave. A goal, on the other hand, is finite. It's short-term and the object of satisfaction that can be completed. You can tick goals off a list. And that's really helpful for gaining quick benefits. For example, visit the dentist every year. Now, I'm really scared of the dentist, but one of my values is bravery. I want to be brave. So when I receive the letter I'm due for a checkup, I'm guided by my value to be brave. Therefore, I know what my goal ought to be. Book myself in, sit down, and get it over with. And through continuing to practice brave acts, in other words, completing small and short-term goals over time, I will eventually be able to say that I'm brave. We become what we do. And our goals are therefore driven by our values. If your values are worthwhile, then it follows that your goals will be too, and therefore the decisions that you make day to day. Good values equals good goals equals good person. So how do you know if a product is good? Hopefully you can see where I'm going with this. A lot of people think about the answer to that question in terms of goals. Product strategies are almost always focused around goals. Build this feature, achieve this percentage, launch by this date. But the reality is that a product is a living thing with a life cycle, just like you and I. Products also need to adapt to changing external and internal factors. And this is where the power of using rules and a values-based product strategy really comes in. Whereas goals are inflexible, values can be interpreted, and therefore they enable adaptability. So as guides for a product strategy, goals just aren't enough. In fact, they can be quite damaging in an agile team, an environment where there is a constant need to adapt. And I just want to take a moment to a little side note to briefly talk about the psychology of goals and why values and why goals are so potentially dangerous for agile teams. Our have a tendency to nudge us towards instant gratification when it comes to decision making. And this is because goals are more tangible and immediate than values. You know, watching one more episode of your favorite binge-worthy show on Netflix offers a far more easily attainable cognitive reward than, for example, practicing the piano. That little hit of dopamine that you get is very troublesome, but arguably practicing the piano is far more valuable as a pursuit in the long term, especially if one of your values is creativity. But the fact is, because of our psychology, most of us would let the Netflix countdown fall to 0 on episode 6. And similarly, making product decisions based solely on short-term goals can sacrifice their long-term health and value. And we need to be really aware of that. And when instant gratification is pulling us towards a decision that doesn't fit with what we want the product to be. Building a great product requires discipline in decision making. What is a product strategy for? This is a really important question. Simply put, the purpose of any product strategy is to prevent wastage in delivery and to maximize the return on investment. but there's a more difficult question of how it should do this. Product strategies ought to act as a decision-making tool, and they ought to guide the team's day-to-day decision-making in the context of a long-term vision. It should also create empowerment for those decisions to be made by the team on the fly. However, more often than not, product strategies are defined and then left in a drawer to gather dust. If this happens, it's because your product strategy is not actually useful. It needs to be used every day. A values-based product strategy is practical as well as strategic. It's more of a Swiss Army knife than a sledgehammer up front, if you like. And without a values-based product strategy, you cannot truly be an agile team because you're being guided by goals which are inflexible, whereas values can be interpreted. There are many, many ways to be brave, but only one way to go to the dentist and get your checkup over with. And to be clear, a product strategy is not a list of features or ideas or bugs. These are goals. Goals are for the roadmap and for the backlog. And I'll come on to that a little bit later on. As product strategies are resources which require input and use from all across the business and the team, there are at least 3 key areas which it must address. First, the user. How are we going to make this product valuable to the user? And will they be able to use it? Secondly, the business. How will we make sure that the product decisions are aligned with our commercial strategy and what we want to achieve as a business? And finally, in terms of technology, how will we prevent technical debt and create an excellent future-proof architecture within our means? Now I want to talk about what a values-based product strategy actually looks like. So there are 4 components to a values-based product strategy. First, the overarching vision for the product. Second, you have supporting product values. Third, the guiding rules and principles. And finally, KPIs and measures. So I'll describe each of these in turn, including what the purpose of each of these is, as well as some important considerations when you're creating them. And in order to do that, let's use an example. This is a hypothetical example. We'll imagine a cryptocurrency fintech startup called BlockPay. So at the top is the product vision. This should tell us what the purpose of the product is by answering 2 big questions. What kind of world are we trying to create, and how will this product deliver on the business's vision? For very large businesses and products, this should be focused on a product while supporting the overarching business strategy. But for small product-centric startups, there will be so much overlap between the business and the product that the product vision might actually encapsulate both. Most product visions fall somewhere in between, supporting commercial objectives whilst retaining a degree of independence from the business's vision. But in any case, when you're defining your vision, you need to think long-term, and specifically in terms of growth, try to keep it qualitative and phrased positively. Think competitively, including how customers will perceive you and what the unique value proposition for them is. Directly below the product vision sit the product values. And we know by now that values are themes for how the product should behave, but that defy completion. These product values support the vision. If you're nailing all of these product values, then you're nailing your product vision too. And when defining product values, it's important to think holistically in terms of how to bring those 3 important areas of the user, business, and technology together. Values should align broadly with the organization's overall commercial objectives over and above digital. And make sure that values are clearly distinct from one another whilst not being overly broad. It's a tricky balance to find sometimes. It can help to define the value too, and add a little bit more detail to that so it's clear exactly what you mean by, for example, here, accessible. Then we're moving on to the rules. So this is such an important part of the product strategy for agile teams. This is what provides the practical day-to-day guidance for the teams to allow them to adapt and make better decisions. And this is what most product strategies are lacking. So each product value has a set of rules specific to that value, split into 3 key areas of the user, business, and technology. To keep it simple in this example, I've included one example rule for each value and for each of those 3 areas to demonstrate the concept. So for the user rules, we should be thinking about UX and UI practices to deliver value to the user. We should be thinking about choices of visual design, information architecture, and usability factors. For technology rules, we should be thinking about development practices to deliver excellent execution and architecture. So for example, looking at systems, components, integrations, and tech choices and stack. And for the business rules, we should be thinking about commercial considerations to deliver value to the business. The channels, partners, costs, resources, governance, processes, and value proposition of the business. But these rules act as the guidance on how to bring that value to life in a practical way, and they serve to shortcut to the right decision and to keep debate really healthy and productive. It's all too often, when there's a difficult decision to make when you're working agile, it can feel like it's difficult to make progress in that decision. But what a product strategy should do is actually remove a lot of the opinion and subjectivity from the discussion and help the team agree on a way forward very, very quickly. And you need rules to be able to do that. And rules should describe in practical terms how the product values will be brought to life. And they don't need to be exhaustive for each product value, but they should provide sufficient guidance for the majority of likely scenarios or available directions. And there's a few different types of rules that you can use in the product strategy. I'll touch on a couple of examples, and perhaps there'll be some more content that we can share afterwards that give a little bit more detail behind this. But for example, you can think about categoric rules. So these are really good for when there is a very clear objective and there are a few impediments to that progress. So this would be to either forbid something, never do something. The example on this slide here is a good example: never integrate with external solutions which are not proven in the market. It's a good example of a categoric rule, but they can be positive as well. We must always do something. The second rule is a good example of that one, actually. You always use design system elements which are inclusive to diverse users. So those are very kind of hard and fast rules. Then you have other rules that are called normative rules, and these are good for where there are some constraints and some interdependencies which are in debate. So the third rule is a good example of a normative rule. Where possible, try and make decisions which challenge industry norms. So this is encouraging movement towards an ideal of being innovative. There are other rules, so you can have relational rules. These are really good for when things get complicated between disciplines to keep track of everything. So this can be, if we do this in tech, then that has this implication on the experience and vice versa. And that can overlap across all 3 different areas as well. So that's really, those rules are really nice for making sure we understand the dependencies between the teams, because that cross-discipline collaboration is so important. The final component is measures. So as we know, what gets measured gets managed. So it should be the factors that make a product a commercial and customer success that get measured. Therefore, when you're choosing your measures, it's important to reflect the overall product vision and the supporting product values. That's really, really important. So each value should have one primary KPI, which supports the aim of that value concretely. So for example, trustworthy, the measure I've picked as an example here is retention. The logic being, the more that the users trust us, the more we will retain them. A simple example, but hopefully demonstrates the point there. And other KPIs and measures can be added for depth or support below these focus measures, but it shouldn't become too busy, as many common KPIs for products are going to be covered as part of the overall analytics strategy. And you don't have to use product-specific measures. In fact, sometimes commercial, customer, or technology measures are more suited to tracking the fluctuations towards or away from a product value. So the third measure here, for example, customer sentiment, not necessarily a product value, but it's a really good indicator of actually, how innovative are we being with our technology choices as a very tech-centered startup. And for those primary KPIs, try and choose simple measures which are specific to that value and don't cross over it to any great extent with other values. And for support KPIs, if you want to add any others underneath these can overlap, but the more overlap there is, the harder it's going to be to track the performance of any individual product value. Because the aim here really is to create a very simple dashboard with 3 to 5 KPIs, if you have 3 to 5 values, which tell you at a quick glance how you're tracking towards your product vision ultimately. So this is a very light, very light illustration of the kinds of product strategies that we at Monstarlab co-create with our clients, and hopefully is useful in illustrating the principles. Earlier I mentioned about the roadmap and how the values-based product strategy relates to that roadmap, which is another really important part of managing a product in an agile team. And we come full circle. The roadmap is goal-based, and goals have to be rooted in worthwhile values for them to be worthwhile themselves, as we saw good values, good goals, good decisions, good product. And product values happily serve as ready-made themes for your agile roadmap. So to get started, you can organize your ideas about features and functionalities or problems, if that's how you're framing your roadmap, around the product values. So in our previous example, if we have worthy as a product value, what can we do to make our products more trustworthy? We can organize our ideas on the roadmap around that value. So, and for an example, if you have an idea, integrate a third-party data source to compare certain products, that's put forward for the roadmap. You can lead a very healthy debate with your team and other stakeholders on how well that goal fits in with the kind of products you're aiming to be. You can ask the question, does it align with its values? And ultimately, is it going to get us to the vision? And that discussion will proceed productively, far more productively, with explicit reference to a values-based product strategy, because it is a far more practical document. The roadmap is a visual, practical guide of how you're trying to achieve the product vision. So if you have a very well-constructed, balanced roadmap, organized and structured in terms of the product values, then you can be confident that what you're going to build is going to be the right thing. So next time you're thinking about how you can be more agile, maybe remember the chessboard and some of the lessons that can be learned from that. Using rules and values to guide decision making will create far more adaptability and empowerment in the team, and it will unlock the true value and potential of agile. Key takeaways. So we know that many agile teams don't feel very agile because they are not adaptable or empowered. And this is because their product strategy needs to be values based. We've gone through those 4 components of the vision, values, rules, and measures. And with this, you can lead a far more healthy debate on decisions that you're making throughout the agile life cycle. And these values that we've talked about are ready-made themes for your roadmap. And if you get your values right, you'll get your goals right, and you'll get your product right. Thank you very much.